Bilgewater and the Serpent Isles, home to Runeterra's sailors, pirates, and Kraken goddess worshippers. Bilgewater is a place where you can procure just about anything you're looking for, whether it's outlawed tech, monster parts, or a fishy bite to eat. If your soul belongs to the sea, you belong in Bilgewater. Here's everything you need to know about Bilgewater in 12 minutes-ish. Like the other videos in this series, this video is going to talk about Bilgewater and the Serpent Isles as a place, the geography and city, the groups of people that live there, the wildlife, etc. Think of it as a tourism guide. History is important, so we're going to talk about history, but it's not going to be a play-by-play of everything that's happened in Bilgewater. This video is Bilgewater 101. After you have this base knowledge, you're ready to understand anything else you hear about the area. If you're just getting started with Runeterra Lore, or you're coming from my shorts, I do recommend you watch my Runeterra Lore overview video first. We're going to occasionally mention other areas and events that have happened in the world in this video. That video gives you an overview of the map and its high-level history, so you won't be lost when I start talking about places like Piltover. And as always, if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing. That would be cool of you. Alright, it's pirate time. The Serpent Isles, sometimes referred to as the Blue Flame Isles, are a collection of islands off the northeastern coast of the continent of Shurima, or southeast of the continent of Valoran. Honestly, it's kind of in the middle. Its location is actually kind of important though when it comes to successful pirating. Look at where the Isles sit in relation to Piltover and Zaun specifically. As you may or may not already know, Piltover and Zaun are something of a trade hub for Runeterra. The split between the two cities was literally caused because they were excavating a trade route to make it easier for ships to get from east to west Valoran. Any ship coming east out of this strait, is that a strait? Somebody with water knowledge hit me with what that's called in the comments. Anyways, coming out of there has to go near Bilgewater. Ergo, pirates. Part of the cluster of islands for the Serpent Isles is the Isle of Buru, the home of the people of the same name, a culture that came out of a migration of humans from a far-off eastern continent 6,000 years before the formation of Noxus. In addition to housing the majority of the Buru people and their culture, it's home to the Temple of the Mother Serpent, the main Serpent Isles temple for the deity known as Nagakaburos. Put a pin in that, and we'll circle back to it. And that leaves us with Bilgewater Bay, the actual home of the city of Bilgewater. This may be my bias towards pirate sea shanty towns, but there's a lot of cool stuff in Bilgewater. One of the most important places in Bilgewater is the Slaughter Docks. Bilgewater Knights see crews setting sail to hunt the many giant sea creatures that roam the waters around Bilgewater. Successful hunts mean large monster carcasses that get brought back to the Slaughter Docks, where they're butchered and broken down into food, teeth, hides, and whatever can be harvested and used. The carving bays for these are typically owned by the richest, most successful purveyors in Bilgewater, so when you haul a monster back to strip it for parts, you're often left bargaining with those who have them to carve your prize before it rots. The Slaughter Docks and their products are an important part of the Bilgewater economy right alongside black markets and other trade. This is also where Gangplank's warehouse was and where his flagship, the Deadpool, was harbored until it exploded. Fairly close to the Slaughter Docks is the White Wharf, which is functionally Bilgewater's graveyard. Rather than being buried in a traditional graveyard, those lost in Bilgewater are returned to the sea, marked by buoys in the place of gravestones and suspended in the sea below. And you may be thinking, ah yes, the White Wharf, named because white for ghosts. It makes perfect sense, but just kidding, it's named the White Wharf because birds won't stop pooping there. There's so much bird poop. There's Cutpurse Square, a large floating market surrounded by homes. The Grey Harbor, one of Bilgewater's ports that's overrun by the Black Mist. You actually spend a decent chunk of the first third of the Ruined King game in Grey Harbor. Rat Town, the largest singular subdivision of Bilgewater, which includes Fleet Street, the equivalent of that street in every town that has all the bars on it. And the Black Market Grottos, which is exactly what it sounds like. You want illicit goods, this is your place. Oh, and of course, how could we forget, there's Oyster Bill's, the finest establishment in all of Bilgewater. Cuisine and company of unparalleled quality come from Oyster Bill's. We love Oyster Bill's. Those are the key points. Bear in mind that while not explicitly called out, the various gangs and crews of Bilgewater all have headquarters in and around the city. What we just talked about isn't everything in Bilgewater, it's just what I think is the important stuff. Okay, let's use the term government loosely here. Bilgewater is controlled by gains and crews. For a long while, the most powerful gain leader was referred to as the Reaver King, and that king was Gangplank until he was dethroned, aka nearly killed, by Misfortune. Misfortune is now the Queen of Bilgewater, slowly attempting to unite the various factions within Bilgewater to bring some semblance of peace. Misfortune's specific crew is the Sirens, and is one of the youngest crews in Bilgewater. Their primary competition is the Jagged Hooks, one of the oldest pirate crews, and loyal to Gangplank. The culture of Bilgewater is a pretty healthy blend of your traditional pirate feel and Buru culture. People are almost always casually armed to protect themselves, whether they're worried about undead heroines or monsters or each other. The prevalence of sea monsters around Bilgewater means that you can see their influence and design across the city, even down to their own currency, the Golden Kraken. It's also important to remember that Bilgewater's nature as a free pirate city means that it attracts all types to settle, so you see a lot of different nations in clothes and items from across Runeterra. A notable aesthetic, however, is the serpent callers, who have incorporated the looks of the very monsters they call for into their clothing, as they utilize specific horns to imitate the cries of deep sea beasts and summon them to the surface. Because Bilgewater is a port city in the middle of the ocean, it lacks a lot of the natural resources you'd typically use for construction. As a result, a lot of Bilgewater's buildings and infrastructure are made using salvaged materials and whatever they can find. So you'll see a lot of ships from all over Runeterra built into Bilgewater as buildings, walls, bridges, and more. It gives the entire city a seafaring shanty vibe. There are bounty boards scattered across the city if you're looking to make some coin off the head of another, gambling houses, bars, and taverns. Everything you can think of that a pirate city needs is built into Bilgewater. It's important to remember that even with its overtly pirate theming, Bilgewater was gifted to outsiders that washed up on the Serpent Isles, also known as Pelangi, by the Buru to settle. That means that Buru culture is also intertwined with the Sailor City, specifically their worship of Nagakaboros, the functional goddess of the sea itself. I was originally planning on talking about Nagakaboros in a big Religions of Runeterra video, but I think this particular faith is too critical to Bilgewater to gloss over. Whether you know her as the Mother Serpent, the Bearded Lady, or the Great Kraken, her domain is life and her aesthetic is perpetual motion. Nagakaboros' faith is centered around the idea of living free and pursuing one's destiny, a tenet that matches very well with the typical view of pirates. The Buru people worship the Mother Serpent, with truth-bearers being the ones who speak the will of the goddess to their people and help Nagakaboros judge the souls of those who require it to determine their worthiness. The Buru are also responsible for planting illuminating idols in the sea around the Serpent Isles that light up when an incoming undead harrowing approaches. I've now mentioned harrowings a couple times, and while they'll be covered more in depth when we talk about the Shadow Isles, it's worth touching on what they are. They're basically ghost storms. The black mist reaches out from the Shadow Isles and rolls over the land, unleashing malevolent spirits who claim more souls and wreak havoc wherever they go. Harrowings aren't specific to Bilgewater, but Bilgewater is very close to the Shadow Isles, so they happen with more frequency. It's like living on a fault line, except instead of earthquakes, you get a storm of angry faces and a lantern with an agenda and an unrepentant man-horse. While misfortune and the denizens of Bilgewater have beaten back harrowings, the role of the Buru against them cannot be overstated. As Nagakaboros is the goddess of life, the undeath presented in the harrowings is a complete affront to her and her followers, so the Buru act as watchful protectors, doing what they can to drive the spirits back from whence they came. Nagakaboros is also the original goddess that the tithe was paid to, a deliberate offering to the sea before every voyage to ensure a safe voyage. To the people outside of Bilgewater, this would seem superstitious, but the people of Bilgewater have heard the stories of Nautilus, who was doomed to become a revenant after his crew failed to pay the tithe, and now roams the waters, punishing any other ships that fail to give a proper offering to the sea. Also worth noting is the presence of Tom Kench, a demon in the form of a very large catfish that preys on the vulnerable and lures them into increasingly difficult situations until they're eventually doomed, a circumstance that, as you can imagine, comes up prominently with gamblers in Bilgewater. Okay, brief warning, I'm going to try and keep this history as spoiler-free for the events of the Ruined King as possible, but there's going to be some very minor spoilers about plot details here, so maybe skip the end of the history section if you want to avoid that. As we've mentioned, the history of the Serpent Isles dates back to the migration of people from the east towards Shurima, where the people now known as the Buru stopped off at the islands along the way. Over time, people began to wash up on the shores of the isles, and so the Buru offered a specific area to these Pelangi, or outsiders, to settle. This settlement became Bilgewater, a free city home to those looking to live life to the fullest. As Gaines and crews vied for control of the city, a Reaver King rose to power. And while his father was Reaver King before him, the most famous Reaver King that we hear about in the lore is Gangplank. Gangplank ran Bilgewater for quite some time as the de facto leader, functionally the most powerful man in Bilgewater. But the reality of being the Reaver King is that it makes you some enemies, specifically Sarah Fortune, whose parents were murdered by Gangplank. So Misfortune hatched a plan, using two mercenary thieves, the League champions Twisted Fate and Graves, as a distraction, in order to orchestrate an assassination attempt on Gangplank that involved blowing up his flagship, the Deadpool. The presumed death of Gangplank plunged the city into chaos, with conflicting Gains trying to wrest control of the city from one another. Gangplank, however, survived, and after briefly seeking assistance from his former lover Illaoi, set out to regain control and his title as Reaver King. Meanwhile, Misfortune worked to try and unite the city of Bilgewater. Originally, she attempted to do this via a truce known as the Corsairs Conclave, but when the rest of the Conclave appeared to be working against her, she took them out and went about her unification efforts solo. At the start of the Ruined King game, Misfortune is still working to unite and protect Bilgewater, and it's over the course of this game that she learns that Gangplank has survived, and has her passion for revenge against him renewed once more. Okay, new section in this video. I decided it might be helpful to provide some additional resources to learn more about Bilgewater. The first thing I'll say is there are a ton of awesome content creators for lore on YouTube, and you should check them all out because they're fantastic resources in and of themselves. In terms of official stuff you can read and engage with if you want more Bilgewater, here are my recommendations. 1. You should read Burning Tides. It details Misfortune's attempts to take out Gangplank as Reaver King. It's pretty chunky as far as League stories go, which makes it a nice read. 2. The story of Shadow and Fortune is a good way to get a sense of what a harrowing in Bilgewater is like. 3. Play the Ruined King. The game is really good, and it's an awesome way to get to run around Bilgewater and learn more about the lore and see more about the current state that Bilgewater is in. And finally, 4. There's a series of videos published by Riot called Legends of Bilgewater that are framed as tales told to you in a tavern and are a pretty neat way to get more Bilgewater lore. I actually really like these. I think it would be cool if we ever saw more of this kind of stuff. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. You now have a good foundational knowledge of what Bilgewater is like, so when you see a video or read a story, like Neela's new story for League, you'll have an idea of what Bilgewater is and you can envision it in your mind. Be sure to comment down below whether or not you live in Bilgewater, and let me know what region you'd like to see me dive into next. Okay, bye.